Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you around the world. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're talking about boosting sustainability in a post-pandemic planet. It's part of the Let's Disrupt series. We're going to be talking about capitalizing on climate change mitigation post-COVID-19. So as we do with Global Chamber, we look for opportunities. We recognize there's plenty of challenges around the world. Let's find ways to work together and create opportunities and a better life for everyone. And so we're really fortunate to have an expert panel today to talk about this topic from different angles. I'd like to first introduce Maimun Rashid Mustafa. He's the Executive Director of Global Chamber in Barisal. He's located in Bangladesh. He's a very global guy and he's very well connected globally, and we're really fortunate to have him both on a regular basis at Global Chamber and also organizing this Let's Disrupt series. Maimun, take it away.
Thank you, Doug, and thanks to everybody all around the whole world. Welcome from Global Chamber Barisal, and I'm the Executive Director, as I guess already has said. So we came up with the idea of Let's Disrupt to talk about and spark conversations on issues affecting our everyday world. And that can range from Industry 4.0 to the Sustainable Development Goals. And we wanted to help shape research-based policy recommendations and interventions. As such, Global Chamber Barisal partnered up with Momentum Consultancy and Facilitation Group, as well as the United Nations Development Programs in Bangladesh's research facility to form this platform of live events and globinars. Since we can't do live events right now because of COVID, we set up with this globinar series, especially in light of the COVID itself. In the previous episode where we talked about SMEs and economics, how small players are affecting, we want to reach out right now and then talk about the environment. And to speak more about this, I'll hand it over to Sohara, our friend and our colleague from the UNDP. Sohara.
Thank you so much, Maimun, for the introduction, and a very warm welcome, everyone, to our webinar. It's a very critical issue we are trying to address here today. It's about the impact and what COVID and a post-COVID world means from a climate change mitigation perspective. And in a way, we can say that the COVID-19 crisis has kind of become a dry run for what the sustainability agenda can look like in the future for companies, and also how we can actually it's providing us an opportunity to envision a taste of what a full-fledged climate crisis could actually entail. So I think it's in a good way, it's a preparation for us of the kind of steps we need to take if we are to prevent that kind of a global catastrophe. So we're seeing a lot of interesting impacts as a result of the worldwide shutdown and lockdown that's been happening because of COVID. Because of the reduced carbon emissions as a result, we are seeing a positive impacts, such as lower carbon footprint globally, as well as improvement in the air quality in many cities around the world. But having said that, beyond these impacts, there are also more critical issues about what this crisis actually means for sustainability in the long run as well as short run, and whether actually these kind of changes that we are experiencing right now, because of reduction in air travel, for instance, because of reduction in how much we commute, whether these actually will sustain in the longer term. And we can already see that sustainability can be hard in the short run. For instance, as China is reopening its economy, the Chinese Ministry of Environment announced that it would temporarily suspend all environmental standards for small businesses to actually accelerate economic recovery. Similarly, the US Environmental Protection Agency is actually stopping the enforcement of monitoring and reporting requirements of environmental protection for companies for an indefinite period if the company can show a COVID-19 related reason for non-compliance. Similarly, in Brazil, for instance, fewer government environmental enforcement officers are actually going to the Amazon now for environmental monitoring because of the impacts of COVID. So we're seeing a lot of setbacks in that form for sustainability in the short term. And also, we are seeing also simultaneously carbon footprint increasing from sources we did not foresee in the future. For instance, the growth of e-commerce as online purchases have been increasing around the world, and there's a lot of carbon emission happening from that. Similarly, plastic pollution from PPE and medical supplies, for instance, is also another issue that is emerging as a challenge because of COVID. So we're seeing that the impacts of COVID on sustainability are really multifaceted. And we really need to think long-term if we are going to come up with a solution of how we are going to transition from COVID into a post-pandemic planet where we can actually bring ahead the positive environmental benefits and charter a path towards a greener trajectory. And we're very happy that to actually shed light on these issues, we have an amazing panel here with us today. So without further ado, I would actually turn it over to them to take the discussion forward.
Very good. Thank you, Sahara. It really means a lot. I'm not sure I introduced myself. I'm Doug Brunke, Global Chamber founder and CEO. It's an interesting transition we've made here at Global Chamber because early in my career, when I went to college, I was all sustainability. It's the only thing I really cared about. And if you want to talk about a lost cause, I was a college student at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. Utah in the US has the highest birth rate of any state in the union. So people like to have babies there. And so as a student, I went to the Utah State Fair and I created a zero population growth booth. And I was there in the booth for several days preaching zero population growth to Mormons and others in Utah. So if you want to talk about hopeless causes and crazy ideas, that was me as a college student. And I became a chemical engineer instead, and that's kind of how I've resolved kind of everything and tried to understand all of that. Very fortunately, we have 4 experts today that are living a full life around sustainability. And the first speaker is Yolanda Saito. She's the co-CEO and director of partnerships and innovations at Impacti. Yolanda is beyond just being the co-CEO and the director. The company itself creates easy-to-use web applications that support the private sector to strategically align their sustainability initiatives to the SDGs and other global agendas. And Yolanda, we're really pleased to have you speak today.
Thanks so much, Doug. Can everyone hear me all right?
Perfectly.
Excellent. Great. All right. Well, thank you for the introduction. I'll jump right into the conversation. I've shared my screen. Can you see my screen right now?
We can.
Perfect. Okay. So when invited, I was actually posed 2 questions in the invitation email that I thought were quite thought-provoking. So I've put them on here because it's guided my intervention today. The first one is what I would call what now? How does the global pandemic present an opportunity for SMEs and those that work with them, like the global chambers, to collaborate and charter a path to a sustainable world? In the second half, I'll talk about, well, then what next? How can SMEs reimagine sustainability as we brace ourselves for the next big impending crisis, that being climate change? So a lot of us are looking at COVID-19 as sort of a dress rehearsal for dealing with climate change, a glimpse into what's coming next in the future. I think a lot of us have already talked about that in the opening here. And we all admit in the short term, sustainability is looking difficult. We're very concerned with hygiene. Oil prices are dropped. Sustainability isn't coming on the top of the agenda. But in the long term, businesses will need to take sustainability seriously in order to look at what changing consumer and investor expectations are and to survive in the next crisis. So I don't just say that, but I base that on the fact that when this crisis started, Impacti actually took a focused look and started a research program to find out what SMEs were doing around the world, how they were reacting, not just to survive, but to work with each other, and how that actually contributed to language that is normally talked about in sustainability, but is talked about right now in COVID is survival. We drew out 2 big lessons from what we saw in our research over the last couple of weeks. The first being that SMEs have proven that they're vital to resilient societies. The companies have been the front line in protecting the workers, their own workers, with the benefits and the flexibility that they've shown them, but also just taking care of how workers are doing. We've been inspired with how many entrepreneurs and SMEs around the world. We're the ones that were able to rapidly innovate, rapidly shift their business models to support public crisis responses, everything from helping access to water, taking care of medical workers, providing medical gear. A lot of these are on our Twitter feed, so if you want more detail, take a look through there. And then finally, consumers and staff may not have thought of this before. Suddenly we're rallying behind local and ethical businesses and calling out those that were not. The second lesson was very much that SMEs do better when they work together. A lot of this collaboration happened because the voices were combined. We heard what SMEs and entrepreneurs were doing as a whole and how much that was actually affecting communities. While it started hard, SMEs worked together to share resources, help get food delivered, help actually share staff, and then share the services that could actually help those particular staff. Again, the Twitter feed is great for that. And that purchasers who actually had built diverse supply chains and sourced locally were doing much better than those who had not. But in the end, ultimately, too many businesses were unprepared, but the mantra comes up of never waste a good crisis, comes to mind here. And what do we mean by that? In the 1970s, we saw that after disastrous workplace accidents and worker deaths, occupational health and safety and emergency response plans became standard business practice, much resisted prior to that. Can we imagine today we're seeing massive business continuity challenges, these job reductions, losses due to COVID? Is it time that perhaps business sustainability and these green and low carbon operations, can they become now core business practices? And from what we're seeing in discussions online, blogs, articles, we're hearing a lot of voices rallying to those cries, the hashtags very much being Build Back Better, Stronger Together. By following these conversations, you're hearing it's not just businesses, but governments, civil society, who are all really concretely talking about what that means to build back better and the big role that governments have, businesses have. So in a nutshell, if we're looking at what have we learned from COVID, I think there's three things that are opportunities for SMEs to keep in mind. The importance of trust right now, and the fact that in many ways governments have lost trust. Businesses are coming out as more trusted actors in these economies. And that's going to be important to be able to do that. 81% of global consumers feel companies should be improving the environment, and those expectations are found to be even higher in Asia Pacific, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. And that young staff today are really looking and changing jobs to go and stay with companies that will take care of them, that are ethical, that are contributing to a better world. Markets. We're all talking about what do we do after COVID, and there are growing calls for a green stimulus package, the language being let's bounce forward, not back from this crisis. And so ethical and sustainable SMEs can start looking at increasing demand from governments who are starting to gear their public procurement programs and looking for local SMEs to partner with, and responsible purchasing by large companies who are also realizing that an inclusive supply chain is important for their own business, not only reputation, but their resilience. And finally, accessing finance. There is pressure for investors to increasingly, they are seeing that when they don't take into climate risk, they are losing funding, that these are now becoming high-risk funds. And we are seeing that not only green funds are emerging, but now a new generation of what they call SDG, or sustainability-linked funds, that actually credit businesses big and also now small, if they can show their impact to local communities, to women, to health, etc. Now, the challenge here, though, is to build trust to access these markets and access these financings. Businesses need to be able to tell their story and show that they're doing this. And that's something that SMEs have not been well supported to do to date. And that's really what drove Impacti to come around. We looked at what SMEs, what does sustainability mean for SMEs right now? It's often ad hoc, it's on demand from purchasers or partners, it's a checklist exercise, and it's often done in paper or Excel. We tried to reimagine what a sustainability could be for SMEs, and we developed tools to help SMEs take control of their own narrative, focus on making real impact, often, let's admit, in collaborations, and go digital. Now that technology is more widespread, to collect data in one place and then report to many. We've been driving a conversation on that under the hashtag #TellYourStory. The Sustainable Development Goals really for us are what makes this possible. It's a tool that can help SMEs because it offers one common language for sustainability where all SMEs can find opportunities. Its 17 goals highlights both risks, but also sees sustainability as an opportunity. It allows SMEs to act local, but connect that to global challenges that are meaningful and then build high impact collaborations. I wanted to look in at an example of a company we worked with that was Yeti Airlines in Nepal. They, in 2017, started out with just commitments and partnerships. They went beyond and checklists and decided to try to take control of their own narrative and looked out to see what were the big issues of the aviation agency. And they took the SDGs as their guide mark. And they committed to start managing their carbon footprint and seeing what they could do. They launched SDG branded planes and tickets and just spread public awareness. By 2019, they became the first airline in Nepal and possibly South Asia to become climate neutral, guided by our experts here at Impacti and also the UN. So our big lessons learned from that was they thought big, they committed, and they collaborated. They weren't afraid to find their way there and leaned on others to kind of help them. Now, aligning to the SDGs, it's great as a tip, but how do you actually do it? SDGs are not written in business-friendly language. And we realized that businesses would need a sort of Google Translate, as you call it, for the SDGs. And that is actually what we've been working on for the last 3 years. We now have an SDG framework for SMEs. We've looked at all of the business resources available out there and translated what are 169 official SDG targets into 105 areas of business opportunity and risks for SMEs. So we've also just gathered all the resources, and those are growing every day quite rapidly, and made them searchable and tagged and curated on our platform, and are creating our own Impacti learning guides. Now, ultimately, we want our resources to allow companies to take control of their stories. So we've also looked at what businesses are doing, benchmarked what they're doing, and come up with more than 1,000 business actions to help businesses decide what they want to do in whatever SDG focused area, whether that's reducing climate, GHG emissions, greening their offices, et cetera, and 1,000 indicators, credible indicators drawn from standards that they can report on their impact credibly. So what does Google translating actually mean? Here's an example. SDG 13 on climate action, what does that come down to in terms of actions that SMEs could take? There's a list there that goes everything from greening offices to minimizing waste to more ambitious, bigger ideas of implementing an EMS or internal carbon taxes. SDG 12, in simple terms, deals with plastic, e-waste, food waste, but also the design of circular products, product sharing services, green labels and certifications. And SDG 9, very much for the manufacturing industry, focus on a broad range of things from constructing green buildings to shifting to clean energy, hosting open innovation, etc. You'll see all of these within our tools. And so our tools basically reimagine what sustainability tools could be, going beyond paper and Excel and complex systems to 3 simple tools. 1, Explore, which is a quick SDG assessment tool that asks a few questions and then allows businesses to get customized recommendations of the right SDG opportunities. Connect, being a network where SDGs can connect with all the resources that are out there that we've gathered, but also with each other. Because ultimately this will be a business-led movement, and the innovations are coming from businesses themselves, but this is a place where they can be crowdsourced together. And manage. And that's ultimately for those businesses ready to tell their story and start writing it credibly, access to those indicators, those business actions, and then design elements to be able to quickly create a report that can be shared beautifully with customers, with staff, or investors, whoever is asking. We work both with SMEs, and our tools are designed for them, but we also understand that it's often business associations and purchasing companies that understand this value of driving sustainability at scale. And so we tailor our tools as well to their memberships. Right now, very importantly, I just want everyone to be invited to join and access the free tool we have, which is Explore. And that's the web link to that. And that is that SDG opportunity finder that I talked about earlier. And then also to contact us for any of the other tools that have been mentioned. And we have a very much a focus on SDG, but also carbon footprint monitoring for businesses that are looking to calculate their GHG emissions and monitor that. And then also upcoming soon in the summer, gender tools as well. That's all for now. And thank you so much, Doug, for the time.
Thank you, Yolanda. You mentioned Twitter, at MakeImpacty is the handle. Our next speaker is Dr. Mazhar Islam. He's the Chase Distinguished Professor of International Business, and he's also an assistant professor at the College of Business, Loyola University in New Orleans, USA. Dr. Islam, thank you for sharing your time and expertise and ideas today.
Thank you, Doug. So I want to talk about some of the business models that we can expect post-pandemic world. Before I start, I would like to just mention a couple of things, because when we say sustainable, the word is thrown around a lot. What I meant here is people, planet, and profit. So it should be more than just profit. People and planet is part of it. And because Yolanda just presented before me, I want to make sure the kind of startup I'm talking about is opportunity driven. So I'm not going to talk about startups that are like mom and pop kind of necessity driven people are taking as an alternative to their employment. These are high growth, high tech kind of startups that are often funded by venture capital or funded by corporate venture capital angel funding. So, so this is the question I would ask first is that, did we have similar experience before? So we had a SARS outbreak in 2003, about 800 people died, 2,000 people are affected. But if we look at if that time there was a change in business model of this kind of startup. So if we go back to the history of Alibaba, what we see there is that Alibaba was a small company. And in May of 2003, one of the employees who was visiting Canton Fair in Guangzhou, she was affected by SARS virus, and she was quarantined, and the entire Alibaba group was quarantined at that time. And during that quarantine period, Alibaba launched this platform for consumer to consumer, which became Taobao now, and one of the largest, in fact, the largest platform in the world in terms of C2C commerce. Similarly, JD.com, the founder of JD, Richard Liu, in 2003, when SARS broke out, he was actually running 12 small electronic stores in Beijing. And when this whole SARS virus came in, 11 of his stores had to be closed. So he had just one store, and he figured out that maybe it's a better idea to do the business online. And that's why he opened a store called 360buy.com, which eventually became JD.com. And JD.com, Alibaba, both are the large e-commerce platforms in the world now. And as you can see, the one outbreak, much smaller, contained within China, has an impact on how business are done. However, we have to remember at that time in China, internet was coming up, so people started getting high-speed internet in their homes, and people were started feeling good about, or at least safe about, using their credit card. So those two things also played a role, but as we can see, that has an impact. Now, coming back to now COVID-19, as I quoted in the beginning of this presentation, that we have an opportunity here because this is the largest environmental experiments that we ever had through the lockdown. So this program manager from NASA, he said recently that world's response to the pandemic is an unintended experiment that is giving us a chance to test our understanding of various air pollution emission sources. Now, this is an opportunity that we would be able to understand atmosphere more, our air pollution more. And in fact, early data from China shows that during the first 4 weeks of lockdown, you see reduction or 25% reduction of carbon dioxide and 50% reduction of nitrogen. And during the introduction, Sohara also mentioned about few of these incidents that we see there's a huge reduction of pollution. However, there are another set of studies that we see the relationship between air pollution and pandemic death. So back in 2003, there has been studies that shows that people who lived in highly polluted cities in China had about twice as much as death rate as cities that are not so polluted. And in recent months, studies, a Harvard study shows that only 1 microgram of per cubic meter increase of PM 2.5 increases the death rate by 8%. So I think this kind of studies will come more because as we are learning more about impact. I live in Louisiana, and one of the things we have is one of the, we call parishes here has high death rate. One of the reasons is one of the most polluted counties or parishes in the country. So, so when I looked at this, so I wonder that if we look at what kind of startup models we are expect to see in next maybe few quarters or next few years. So I divided into 3 groups. First group, you can see what I call pandemic-related startups. So these are the startups that are coming up or already launched. Like Epidem is London-based. It allows companies to track the infections. COVID app is similarly in Lithuania, excuse me, app which has similar capabilities to track people who are affected. Out on the other hand is an Israeli startup that helps people to keep their house virus, can minimize the virus. So these are the startups you'll see more and more coming up. I was looking at Crunchbase, which I use for my research, and you see a number of startups came up in this domain of directly trying to solve the problem or associate problem that are related to this pandemic we are in. So next set of startups that I am seeing that coming up, and some of them are getting funding, what I call them non-contact technologies. So non-contact technologies are allowing people to be maintaining social distance and trying to conduct economic activities. So if you look at this domain, there's this startup called Cosmopoly. I was looking at this Irish startup. They're creating a different kind of job board that all those virtual jobs should be there. So people could, the companies that are hiring people to work remotely and the people who are looking for those kind of jobs would be matched on this platform. Similarly, the other startup I thought interesting is, again, these are the, again, startups that are helping people to conduct economic activities without being socially close. Again, this is a startup that is education kind of startup, helping people to children to learn through storytelling. Now, question is that I think the third level of startup, which will not be directly related to this pandemic, is what I call sustainable startup in post-pandemic world. I think there will be three areas kind of you'll see this kind of startup: renewable energy, public health, and pollution monitoring. So if you look at the pollution monitoring domain, it's not very easy if you are in a home anywhere in the world. If you want to know the pollution level, you don't have, like, you can't take out your smartphone or look at your computer often. You can look at your computer, but this data is not very organized. So there are many startups that are coming up trying to get into this domain and allowing people to access to this information. Now, because of the lack of time, I'll focus on one area that I did some research. In fact, Professor Marcos and I have a paper in this area. We looked at renewable energy sector. And renewables energy sector, we believe that there will be more and more attention because of some of the factors we already discussed in this panel. But there are challenges, right? And I think Yolanda already mentioned about lack of funding, oil price, low oil price would make not so much incentives for large oil companies to invest in this space. And also venture capital investment has been already lower in recent quarters. And I think that would continue for some time. And investment by oil companies as corporate venture capital, that would most likely would go down in next few quarters. So the last slide I have before I want to conclude that this is pretty much we call values of death. And values of death is something that is typical for a renewable energy sector. If you look at high growth, high tech kind of startup in clean tech, in solar energy, or if you think about wind power. So there are two kind of values that we see that many startups, they go bankrupt or they go out of business. So one phase is what we call pre-commercialization gap. Other one is when we say scaling up. So why I wanted to show you as my last slide, because the role of government is important. Because as you can see, in this sector, government needs to put up support in terms of early stage research in the forms of grants. So if you look at the government here, that early stage industry would invest money. So startups would come in, but there is a role for government. And in our research, we show that in the United States, Federal Reserve, Department of Energy, Department of Agriculture, Department of Defense have put grant money for startups, which help the startup not only that they could use that money for advancing their research, but it also helped them to gain or get venture capital money in future. So, and the second stage, when the startups venture capital money dries out, there is also a requirement for government, and that's mostly often in terms of loan guarantees. So again, if we want to see, going back to my this slide, that sustainable startups, yes, there would be some of the startups, but governments around the world needs to open up and allow provide some sort of grant at early stage and some sort of loan guarantees or other supports at the late stage. With that, I want to conclude. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Islam. We've heard a lot then, that these crises can create opportunities. And so great way of explaining it. Prior to that, Yolanda talked about trust, talked about accessing markets and finance and becoming more effective in communications. Our next speaker, Dr. Sahad Hossain, is the Director of Solid Waste Institute for Sustainability at the University of Texas at Arlington. And so Dr. Hossain, thank you for your time and expertise.
Thank you very much, Doug. I will start sharing my screen, and there's two very good presentations from Yolanda and Majar, and both of them talked about sustainable business. I'm going to focus heavily on COVID-19 and waste management, how much waste is generated, and what are the potential business that can lead to next to the COVID. Now, during COVID-19 lockdown, two things are happening. During lockdown, services are divided into two categories. Number one, essential service. Number two, non-essential service, which are partially or fully closed, discontinued. They are not running their business. Waste collection happens to be one of the essential service. And without the waste collection service, sometimes we're going to have trouble, because if you look at this slide here, we have a lot of people involved, and along with this comes some risk. We're going to look at them. During COVID-19, mainly two types of waste are generated. One type of waste that is generated inside the hospital and healthcare facilities. According to CDC, Center for Disease Control in USA, and World Health Organization, all the waste that is generated inside the healthcare facility should be treated as medical waste. That includes masks, gloves, specimens, herbs, single-use, microfiber, plastic clothes, everything. But there is also another set of waste that is generated outside the healthcare facilities. Those are, people, everybody is using masks. Most people are using hand gloves. Now there is another COVID waste that people usually don't see. Group of people who are staying at home, who are recovering at home, they are moderately affected COVID patient. Whatever the trash they are generating, they are also COVID waste. But because they are staying at home, whatever they are generating, according to CDC, WHO, and OSHA, they don't have to be considered as medical waste. They are considered as non-hazardous waste. So any waste COVID related that's generated outside the healthcare facilities will be considered as non-hazardous and will be treated as regular municipal solid waste. Another main issue that we have during the COVID, volume of waste. In Wuhan, the center of global crisis, at the peak of their crisis, they generated 240 tons of medical waste a day, 240 tons. So they they build a new hospital. They also build a medical waste treatment plant. They had to build a completely new medical treatment plant. They also built 46 waste treatment facility, mobile treatment facility. Municipal solid waste also increased significantly. Municipal solid waste are the two categories, residential and commercial. If you look at this, during the lockdown, everybody is at home. So no matter what they're doing, people are cooking more than normal during the quarantine time. People are experimenting with cooking. So they are generating a lot more trash, and based on the data from USA, we have 40% more residential waste. But on the other hand, because all the commercial business are closed, commercial solid waste, it has decreased by 20 to 30%. Overall, waste generation has, non-medical waste generation increased 10 to 15%. But between all of this waste, one general trend that has emerged, and that is increase in plastic waste. Now, many cities were banning single-use plastic bag. Because of the COVID, people started saying, if we cannot use the same thing again and again, because there may be COVID virus in the bag. So many stores in USA, they ask people don't to bring their own bag. They have to use one-time use plastic bag. Number two, a lot more people are using plastic as their body bag. Plastic they are putting on top of their clothes to safeguard themselves. People are using this as a support. In the hospital, we are nurses, doctors, everybody are saving patients, saving life. To save themselves, they're using, PPEs. Most of these PPEs, if you look at the mask, they are gear in front of their eyes, the clothes are made out of plastic. So there is a tremendous explosion of plastic waste. Now, why, when we are talking about the waste, this waste will be handled by the waste management professionals or waste workers. One major issue when they're handling, virus can survive up to 24 to 72 hours in this individual waste component. Paper, they can survive up to 24 hours. Plastic, metal content, metal surface, they can live up to 72 hours. So when the waste workers are going and collecting the trash, if they are not properly bagged, if they're loose, if they're trying to touch them with their hand, there is a potential if those surface had some contact with some COVID patient or asymptomatic patient who had some sneezed on them, there is a potential that wastewater can get affected. So we need to make sure during this COVID period, waste workers are safe. Swana, everybody said that there are two things that's must. Gloves and mask should be used by everybody. And according to TCQ, Texas Council of Environmental Quality, all the bags should be double bagged so that there is no way wastewater workers are coming in contact with the garbage or the COVID virus. Now, if you look at this practice immediately during the corona and lockdown, developed countries, the wastewater are using masks and gloves. This is from USA, this is from another country. On the other hand, in developing countries, look at this. These are both informal and formal sector. None of the worker, whoever is dealing with the trash, has hand gloves or mask. This puts them in a greater danger for the waste getting affected by the virus. If we look at this here, this is another, if you go to the previous slide, this is what we should be doing. This slide I'm showing to show what we should not be doing. Many of the developed countries, including USA and Europe and Wuhan, they manage their waste. One of the methods they use is incineration or waste to energy plant. In northern Italy, 72% of the incineration plants are in northern Italy. Most of the COVID cases and deaths in Italy are in northern Italy. Wuhan, they have 5 waste to energy plant or incinerators. Incinerator release dioxin, PM 2.5, which, very small particle material, which gets directly into people's body. This causes hypertension. They also causes pressure, diabetics, all those disease that affects the COVID patient more are by the pollutant from solid waste or the air pollution that caused by the incinerator. I want to focus you on the US map. If you look at the northeast corner, New York and others, all these green dots are incinerators. Look at the COVID cases. The World Coronavirus Center right now in New York and the surrounding state, if you look at them, all the incinerators are in that corner. If you go to California, you can see 2 dots. If you go to California, coronavirus cases, there are 2 dots. Now, the reason I'm showing this, many of the developing countries, including Bangladesh, India, they are trying to get into their waste management using incinerators. What I'm telling them, no matter what you do, don't use the incinerators as their waste management system. This cannot be part of their system. Another thing that's happening, in COVID, people are throwing away their hand gloves, mask on the street, and it's creating a problem. This littering needs to stop. Why? As we know that virus can stay in plastic surface up to 27 hours, 72 hours. So if someone throwing a hand gloves and somehow there is virus in there, it can blow into somebody's faces and it can contaminate those people. Or if the informal workers are trying to take them, without using gloves or masks, they can get affected. Also another major issue, this plastic material, they can choke the drain. They can clog the drain and cause flash flooding. This is a photo from Bangladesh a few years ago when the rainy season, during the rainy season that was not supposed to be flooding. The city was flooded. Why? Most of the drainage lines were not working. They're clogged with plastics. They're clogged with the garbage because the collection in Bangladesh and most of the developing countries are less than 50%. So all the uncollected garbage, including one-time use plastic and plastic material ends in drain and causes flooding. Now, 2020, if we don't remember anything, one thing we'll remember, people are using their hand sanitizer to clean their hand or they're washing their hand all the time. At this time, we cannot go back to this kind of environmental condition when the garbage is on the street, garbage is piled up on the street. No matter how many times you're using hand sanitizer, no matter how many times you're washing your hands are going to be dirty the moment you get out of your home. So what we need to do, we need to, what are the potential business opportunities? What are the things that we need to do? One, processing of additional medical waste. Medical waste has been, tremendously increased in China, in USA. They cannot predict even how many times it's going to be increased than the before. In China, Wuhan, it was 6 times more pre-COVID versus after during the COVID. Processing and recycling of plastic waste, which has an explosion in the world now. Collection and management of municipal solid waste. Management, once again, we cannot use incinerators in developing country. They cause all kind of problem because they are one of the major source of air pollution. We can also have, social awareness program, safety training program, and strict enforcement of littering policy, which can only happen if public and private sector combine together and come up with business ideas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hossain. We only have about 10 minutes left, and so we are not going to have time to answer questions within our hour time frame, but I would encourage you to ask questions in 3 ways. Number one, you can do it in the Q&A and we'll capture it and we'll follow up with you. Number 2, you can send an email to info@globalchamber.org with your question. That's also a good way to connect to the speakers, any of the speakers, if you're not able to find another way to do it through the Global Chamber directory. And number 3 is there is a live Facebook program going on at Let's Disrupt, and I encourage you to go there and ask questions and we'll be able to process them there. And if possible, I encourage the speakers after the hour is up to go there to Facebook and look at what questions are being asked and answer questions there. Not required, but if you can, great. And if not, at least we'll have captured some of the questions that are out there. So our final speaker before we wrap up is Dr. Alfred Marcus. He's an award-winning author and he's Edson Spencer Endowed Chair in Strategy and Technological Leadership at the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. So Dr. Marcus, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. Dr. Marcus.
Yes. I'm just trying to share my screen here.
Ah, wonderful.
Okay. I'm going to try to be as short as I can possibly be because of the time component. I'm going to go over a number of facts that I think everybody knows by now. It's the rise in the amount of COVID and its expansion. But I think this is very, very interesting if we observe the impact on the world economies. And that's what I wanted to focus upon. As we all know, it has brought about a radical decline in economic growth nearly everywhere in the world. In the United States, we're predicting as much as a decline of about 25%. These are unprecedented circumstances. So I want to begin to think about we know that jobless claims have soared in the United States and in the rest of the world. And again, totally unprecedented. We don't know all the impacts and how long this is going to last. There are many people that are hopeful that there'll be a V-like recovery. This V-like recovery may not occur. But for the time being, there are many, many people in dire straits in terms of their livelihood, and they're being supported by the government. We've had an unprecedented rise in the amount of control over economies in the world, despite many governments that are not particularly sympathetic to this type of situation, but their involvement in the economy has expanded very, very greatly as one system after another has broken down. We also know that accompanying this fall off in economic activity, there's been a decline in energy use and electricity use. We know the price of oil and gas has fallen quite dramatically. So I want to raise some of the impacts of this. Now, it's actually surprising that electricity use has fallen this much because the digital economy has expanded, and the very fact that we're using Zoom right now is that we're putting stress on the environment through our use of electricity. And then we know that in China, before and after the COVID, the amount of pollution that was being emitted was quite immense. And then COVID because its shutdown of factories in China also led to a massive reduction in the amount of air emissions of all kinds, including climate gases. And this is just NOx before and after the Chinese New Year holiday after COVID took place. And we know now that after the Chinese are beginning to open up their economy, and manufacturing is beginning to increase and pick up in China, it's throughout the world, it is generally in decline. So I want to speculate a little bit about these, what's going to be the long-term effect of this phenomena. And I think that basic structural change, which leads to less pollution, comes about not because of government necessarily. Government has played a very, very important role. I don't want to deny that. It also, unfortunately, does not come about because of the voluntary cooperation of companies primarily. I've also studied this a bit and looked at the empirical literature. I think that the major reason that the amount of pollution that is let into the atmosphere changes in a particular society is structural and economic change. And I can give you an example of this. I think one of the main reasons why the United States is net a much cleaner society than it was in the 1960s is not, we've exported our pollution to China, but the United States now is structurally a very, very different economy than it was in the 1960s. In the 1960s, it was still a manufacturing and industrial economy. Today, it's a service economy. And I think that kind of structural change makes a huge amount of difference. Now, the question is right now, and there's huge uncertainty, and I don't want to predict, but I think there are going to be some fundamental changes that are going to come about in the global economy that actually will be positive for climate change, but negative for the well-being of many people in the world. And so if we think about sustainability broadly as both the environment, and if we think about sustainability in terms of people's economic welfare, it will be, strangely enough, a plus for the environment and a minus for people's overall welfare. So I'm predicting, I did a book recently called Strategies for Managing Uncertainty. And I was looking at booms and busts in the energy industry, and I was in particular looking at the low oil and gas prices that occurred in about the year 2015 and 2016. And when I started doing that book, I thought that low energy prices would be bad for the environment because people would therefore, use more energy, and that was really a bad circumstance. What we really needed in the world was oil prices of over $100 a barrel to really make a dent on climate change. But actually, when I really began to look at it more carefully, I became aware of the fact that when energy prices declined, and it's occurring right now, it's really, really bad for the large integrated oil and natural gas companies. And they have to shed assets at a very, very rapid rate. And they can't invest in new assets to create additional fossil fuel assets in their portfolios, which means that they have less portfolios of carbon-based fuels that they have to ultimately sell to somebody in the future. So in a kind of ironic way, the bad economic circumstances right now that the oil and gas industry is in is a positive for the environment in a way that no social movement trying to change them could ever bring about. And so I think that we're in the process of consumer demand is another factor. Like, I think that sure, it's likely the world economy will see a recovery, but it's not going to be a rapid recovery. I mean, I wrote a book once and I said, you should never predict the future. All we can do is create scenarios of various futures. But I'll go on a limb right now and say that the COVID crisis is going to be with us for at least 2 years, and the economic crisis associated with it is going to be with us for at least 5 years. And it's going to leave a lasting impression on the total global economy and the total global society. And it's going to change habits on the one hand, but even more fundamentally, it's going to change the structure of the world economy. And I think that many of the trends that are already underway, such as increased digitization, dematerialization of the world, these things are going to be accelerated, and they're going to occur because of necessity, not because any government makes any mandates. The governments are probably going to loosen environmental controls as they have until now, but that will not stop this other trend of necessity driving positive environmental change that will come out of this crisis, because people cannot afford as much material consumption as they have previously. And they will cut back, and as a consequence, there will be less demand. So Chinese manufacturing will increase, but will not get up to the point where it was previously. The Chinese economy is not going to continue to grow. It's anywhere between 5 and 15% per year. The world economy is not going to grow at levels that we've seen previously, at least in the short run. And so and the environmental effects of this are going to be good. Now, the impacts on entrepreneurship also are there, as Mazar kind of spoke about as well, because there's a lot of turmoil that's going to be going on. A lot of old business models are not going to work anymore, and there's a need for innovation. And even during the Great Depression in the United States, a lot of the innovation that came out later in the 1950s and the 1960s were hatched during the Great Depression. So I think this will be a very innovative time, but a very, very difficult time that we're facing going into the future. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think I have another. That was my last slide, and I know we're running out of time. So that's basically what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Dr. Marcus. So we have done here in 60 minutes is given you an amazing amount of information to digest. And so what I would suggest is pop over to Facebook, to the Let's Disrupt group, and check that out. I also encourage you, if this is your first exposure to Global Chamber, to check out some of the things that we do on a regular basis, typically several times a week. We do events like this. Our next one is actually tomorrow on markets and mega trends of Japan, with 3 extraordinary women who will be speaking about that. I'd like to turn over the program now to Maimun, who will take us home. Maimun.
Everyone, thank you so much for your amazing opinions, data, statistics, and new ideas. So just saying my last words from Global Chamber of Rizal, we want to connect you more to new ideas next week through all of our 525 and growing metros. Next week, specifically from the environment, we'll go on to awareness. We'll talk about the role of the media and how it informs businesses and individuals in decision making. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for speaking, guys. And if you
Bye-bye.
can, jump
Thanks.
over to
Doug,
Facebook
I'm getting
and
a lot
answer
of
some
questions.
questions.
Doug, I'm getting a lot of questions. How do I address them?
If you want to send the information to us, what we're going to do is we're going to put together a blog post. And so if you could maybe, however you feel comfortable, if you want to forward your answers with the questions or however you're getting them, where are you getting them? By email or by?
Both in Zoom and Facebook, both.
Okay.
There are a lot of questions on Facebook and there are a lot of questions on Zoom.
Okay, well, we'll take a look. There's a lot on Zoom as well. Okay, so we'll be able to take a look at those. I think between Cesar and I, we'll capture them. And then on Facebook, we'll see them, right? So we'll be able to look at them there. So does that work for you?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.